views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Coming up on this edition of Perspectives, it is Black History Month, and on the heels of what is an unusual year, where racial justice once again was brought to the forefront. In a pandemic world, we've seen these injustices exposed in other areas of our society. But coming up on this edition of Perspectives, we go front and center with our very special guest, who joins me to talk about his view of our city and what he's doing to help move our city forward. That's on Perspectives with yours truly, Daren Jaime.
What's on your mind? Express what's on your mind. What's on your mind?
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference in someone's life. Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
What's your perspective? Let them know.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Perspectives. I am Daren Jaime. We thank you for joining. And as always, you can watch Perspectives every week here on BronxNet's channel 67. Also, if you have Optimum, that's channel 2133. We also encourage you, stay connected to us on our website at bronxnet.org. Now, we can't forget about social media. If you're on social media, yes, our station is BronxNet TV. My personal social media on Twitter as well as on Instagram. You can see me at DC Jaime 23. My professional page on Facebook, Daren C. Jaime. And of course, you will not just get information, but you'll also get some inspiration if you look real close as well. So glad to have you sharing with us on this show. As we're talking about it's Black History Month. And my guest today in studio is an experienced educator. He's also a professor of both African American studies and political science at several CUNY and SUNY colleges. He holds a Master of Science degree from the New School for Research in Urban Policy and Management. He is also currently pursuing a doctoral degree in political science at the Graduate Center for CUNY. And in addition to all of that, he also finds time to serve as the New York State legislator for the people of Brooklyn. We're talking about Senator Kevin Parker, fifth-ranking Democrat in the Senate leadership. We welcome him to Perspectives. And Senator Parker, good to have you.
Thanks for having me, Daren. I appreciate it. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you and good to have you on this platform as we sit and talk a little bit about New York for a minute and New York City and how you see things. And first of all, it's a new year. And of course, new presidential administration, but we still got some old things that we're contending with. And that old is really navigating through the COVID crisis. So first of all, give us a little bit about how you feel the city is moving, particularly now in a time when we're still trying to navigate the COVID crisis. And we've got, vaccination supplies coming in slow streaming.
Well, in the context of the COVID crisis, we are dealing with kind of a double pandemic, right? The first is a fight for our lives. People are literally getting sick and people are dying. And then the other is the fight for our livelihoods. Because at the time of trying to battle this, we actually closed the economy or slowed it down significantly. And so people have lost their jobs. Businesses have closed, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently. And so it's created a real stress for people. Not just in the city of New York, but across the state and across the country. And people like myself who've been serving in the state legislature have been trying to deal with this since day one. I served both as the chairman of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee, as well as the majority whip in the New York State Senate. And now also, obviously, running as a candidate for a city comptroller. But in the state Senate, we've done a couple of things to kind of address this. One of the things that I did is pass a law that instructs the state Office of Health Disparities to do a study on the impact of COVID-19 on African American and Latino communities. We know that there's a significant gap in between how this pandemic has affected the white community, has affected communities of color, and we certainly need to have an official report understanding that and addressing that. The other thing I've done with my hat as the chair of the Energy Committee is put in place a utility moratorium. And that has essentially stopped utility companies like the gas and electric companies from cutting you off while we're in a state of emergency. We need to extend that coming up shortly, but we really need to kind of keep people in place to make sure that people had the services that they needed while we're still in the middle of this pandemic.
Yeah. A lot of conversation goes about the equitable distribution of vaccine. And we know that the governor was down in Brooklyn not too long ago talking about pop-up sites and having these pop-up sites to deal with some of the healthcare disparities and getting to the most vulnerable population. Walk us through a little bit of that. And what are you seeing on your end and what can you tell us?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, let's be very, very clear that the beginning and the problems that we've seen with the battling of this pandemic comes from the lack of leadership that we saw in the last presidential administration, right? Where it was where the pandemic was politicized instead of dealt with as a real crisis for every American citizen, and so we never got the PPE that we needed. We never got the money that we needed. We never got the leadership that we needed as a nation. I think that the governor has done a great job at kind of standing in that gap and doing what he can. We don't produce the vaccine. And so we've been dependent on the federal government, who's supposed to be distributing the vaccines, to get it to us. And so we have not gotten it. And it's not just a New York State dynamic. All over the country, you hear state governments complaining about not getting the number of vaccines that they needed. We have, I think, done a great job at developing sites. In fact, up in the Bronx today, Yankee Stadium is opening up as a super site to, in fact, take in folks. And that's going to be, I think, a big help in terms of getting people access to the sites. But one of the other things that we're seeing is even in places like the South Bronx, where Yankee Stadium is, so far, the people that you see getting the vaccine are mostly white, older, and more affluent, as opposed to African Americans, Latinos, and lower income folks who are the people who have been disproportionately impacted both in sickness and death, by this virus. And so we really need to have, some measures that really produce more equity in our healthcare system.
Yeah. Talk about equity. I want to talk about economic equity. That's something that many people in New York are really trying to deal with and grapple with, particularly after this COVID crisis. We see businesses that are shutting down. We know that a lot of New Yorkers are currently unemployed. How do we get back on track with this economics, with an economic stimulus? I mean, obviously, a stimulus package is not enough just to do it for the individual, much less small business. Right.
I totally agree with you. We're not going to tax our way out of this. We're certainly not going to get enough stimulus to build, to get ourselves out of this. We're going to have to build our way out of this, Daren. And really what we're going to need to do is look at producing more opportunities for small businesses. And this is particularly true for Black and Latino communities, where the vast majority of our populations are already working in small businesses. But what we see, again, is a disproportionate impact of the slowing down of the economy on our communities, where you have, for instance, amongst restaurants, around 25% of the white restaurants going out of business during this time. You have almost, over 40% of Black restaurants going out of business during, because of COVID. Those who have shut their doors, for over 40% of them are not going to reopen. And so we really need to be laser focused on providing support for small businesses. And what is that? Access to capital, access to bonding, access to the kind of technical assistance that businesses need to shift in the context of this COVID economy, right? And so we have an economy that's moved from Wall Street to Main Street, and we have to make sure that on places like the Grand Concourse and Tremont and Westchester, that people have the access to the things they need in order to build their businesses. Why? Not because we care so much about petty bourgeois capitalism, but we know that when you build a Black woman's business, she hires other Black women. When you put Latinos to work in their own businesses, they hire other Latinos. And so we need to do that in order to build our economy and get people back to work. And that's how we build our economy from this place into greatness.
We're going to take a quick break and continue our conversation with Senator Kevin Parker. He'll be with us as soon as we take this break, and we'll be right back right here on Perspectives.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption
of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting
to the new reality.
Reporting from BronxNet, this is Tran.
And we're back here on Perspectives. Daren Jaime here with you. Our guest today, Senator Kevin Parker, who is coming to us and sharing a little bit about what is going on in the city of New York, talking a little bit about the economy, talking about jobs. But as this is also Black History Month, want to get a little bit of Black history in here and talk about a very important topic. Senator Parker, one of the things I know that you're very responsible for is the legislation. We're making Juneteenth a holiday here in New York State. This is something that will go down in history, something that is a legislation that you wrote. Talk to us about your thoughts now that this legislation is going forward.
Daren, culture is the framework that defines. And so, amongst African Americans, it's been really important for us to not just connect with our culture, but reconnect with our culture. And particularly using African American History Month as a jumping off point. And so this legislation, which actually was done by myself and Assemblywoman Alicia Hyman from Queens, was able to get done really after a long road of making the argument in the state legislature that we really need to take some time out and recognize the accomplishments of African Americans in our state and in our great city. And so I think that this holiday is important because we also need to begin that process of reconciliation of America and the state of New York understanding what they did to African Americans by dragging them here in enslavement and putting them to work for free for hundreds of years, and then continue that process of us kind of getting to re-know who we are, understanding our history. And understanding that our history didn't begin in 1619 when we washed up on the shores of Jamestown, Virginia, but we have a 10,000-year-old legacy that goes back to the shores of Kemet and ancient Egypt and to Nigeria. And so that has been a big part of what we're trying to get across to people with this holiday.
Yeah. During the time when that legislation got passed, it was during the time of very heightened tensions here. We know the death of George Floyd sparked national outrage again. Unarmed Blacks seeming to be, murdered at the hands of police and nothing being done. We know that Black Lives Matter and other movements have called for the defunding of police. I want to talk to you a little bit about your perspective, because in that you are looking for some police reform. You are looking for reallocation of funds. And so in principle, do you agree with the whole term of defunding or reallocating those funds? Maybe is defunding the wrong word, or should we put it in a different perspective?
Let me say this. I don't necessarily like the slogan because I think it doesn't necessarily tell us how to reallocate the funds, right? And so if you look at what happened in the city council last year, they took $1 billion out of the $6 or $7 billion budget of the police. Somebody tell me where that $1 billion went. Don't worry, I'll wait, right? The reality is we really need to have a more open conversation about it, right? And let's not get caught up on the slogan. Let's talk about the work and the deeds that need to be done. The state legislature in the state of New York was the first state in the country after the murder of George Floyd to actually pass a comprehensive set of legislative initiatives, right? Including 4 bills that I passed that included the 911 false reporting bill and a bill that forced state police to wear body cameras, right? Since then, I've written 15 other bills, including a bill that requires NYPD residency, a bill that defines excessive use of force in the law, another bill that creates a non-police response to mental health and homeless calls, right? And it's really that out-of-the-box imaginative thinking that when we start talking about defund the police that we really mean. They're like, what other ways can we, in fact, use the resources that are now being used for police in our community to make our community better?
Talk to me about the residency requirement, because we hear that in a lot of places, from upstate all the way downstate. People are really saying, listen, when there's a cultural competence, you can see community policing in a much better way. Are we hopeful that this residency requirement will come? Because we do know that the unions have definitely said this is not something we want to see happen.
Well, no, just the opposite. I mean, the message I've gotten from Pat Lynch is that he's looking for more money for his members, but he's actually okay with the notion of NYPD residency requirement. And frankly, we actually did two pieces of legislation. We did one residency requirement for New York City, and then one for the rest of the state, because I think that it's really a critical piece, no matter where you are in the state of New York. But let me just say this. I think that this is an issue of, obviously, as you talk about cultural competency, but it's also an economic issue. From this point, we have actually allowed ourselves, particularly as Black and Latino communities, to be policed by an invading force. Really doesn't make any sense to have a bunch of people outside of us, police us. We should have people from our community who are the police in our community. Why? Because we understand that we'll get a better level, a more compassionate, a more respectful level of police and service than we're currently getting now. The other piece that we have to really understand is that these are good jobs. And in a time when we just talked about, how do we create full-time jobs and living wage and benefits, we really ought to be talking to young people in our communities about being police officers, right? Because these are good jobs. Eric Adams, the borough president out of Brooklyn, always talks about the fact that he traveled the world, bought homes, and sent his child to college without loans because of his service in the police department. We should give other families those same kind of opportunities while simultaneously providing the kind of police presence in our community that we need. Not just because it's going to be respectful, but it's also going to be more diligent. And I think that that's part of the problem that we have now. I actually disagree with many of my colleagues who say that we're over-policed. I actually disagree. I think we're under-policed. And if you look at places like Manhattan, most of the people live above 96th Street, but most of the police are actually deployed below 96th Street because they're there to protect property, not protect people. We need better protection, but that protection and that service needs to happen with dignity and respect.
Yeah. So when we talk about reallocating the funds, where would you like to see these funds allocated to? We talk about, and I got a little bit, but like 2 minutes left on this one here. But tell me, give me some ideas or view some ideas as to where we can see some reallocation.
Well, the first thing I talked about was, again, a non-police response to mental health and homeless calls. I've written the legislation to have a study bill and an actual implementation bill. Those things need to happen. They also need to go into our schools. We need to add more music, art, athletics, and dance as regular parts of the curriculum. We need more school-based athletics. And we also need to make, now that we have universal pre-K, we now need universal after school. And I prefer a beacon school model or community school model. But we need to have something that both provides, homework help, step team, basketball, karate, but then simultaneously for parents provides, maybe counseling, Al-Anon, job training, coding, right? The kind of things that bring families together. And we need to use young people as access points into families. And it's really using money and those kind of ways that's really going to transform our communities in a way that provides progress.
Maybe even a revival of the police athletic league, something like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I grew up in the police athletic league, but I think it was a place that was a deterrent. And yeah, they did the streets a lot because I had somewhere to go. I mean, I think that it's, some things we're on the same page. All right. Well, I'm gonna take a quick break, come back with more Senator Parker with us here on Perspectives. Be back in just a few seconds. Coming up after the break, we're going to discuss his future aspirations.
New Yorkers have mastered existing in crowded places and walking fast. Now is the time to master social distancing. Social distancing means creating more personal space between yourself and others, at least 6 feet. Creating more physical distance protects yourself and other New Yorkers from the spread of coronavirus. To do your part, stay home. Stay connected through calls, texts, and video chats. If you have to go out for essentials like food and medicine, avoid crowds and put space between yourself and other people standing in line. If you go outside, just remember to keep 6 feet of space between yourself and others. This is not just about you. It's also about protecting the most vulnerable and preserving the health of essential workers who are on the front lines. If you're feeling overwhelmed, connect with counselors at NYC Well. Text COVID to 692-692 for real-time updates or visit nyc.gov/coronavirus.
And we're back here on Perspectives. Daren Jaime here with you. Thank you for sharing with us here as we are talking during Black History Month, talking with none other than Senator Kevin Parker, who's been sharing his views about New York City, talking about the police, the economy, post-COVID, well, not post-COVID, but COVID reaction and the vaccine, and really trying to navigate in a time when there's a lot of questions, just trying to get some answers. And so in the midst of a whole lot of questions that we've thrown at him, I'm going to look for this answer right here. It seems as though, Senator Parker, that in addition to being senator, you also have your sights set to be comptroller for New York City, looking to put your hat in the ring. Talk to us a little bit about why you want to be a comptroller and what you feel like you can bring to the table.
Well, Daren, I'm a true New Yorker, born and raised in Brooklyn. I actually grew up in the Bushwick Projects, went to public school my entire life, PS 193, Huddy Junior High School, Midwood High School. And after college, I've spent my entire professional life working in public service. And for 18 years, I've served in the Senate. The whole time being on the Finance Committee, I've been on the Banking Committee and Insurance Committee for over 10 years. And I've been the Majority Whip for 10 years. So I think I really want to bring both, not just that experience, not just the leadership, but more importantly, my vision for how we can turn the city around to the city, to my community, to people I know and my neighbors who I know are hurting so much at this time. And so, my leadership around police reform, as we talked about, my understanding of the clean energy economy and how do we, in fact, use that clean energy economy to rebuild our economy here during the midst of COVID, but also how do we address the issues of homelessness, of housing affordability? How do we, in fact, use the pension fund, right, which is the fourth largest pension fund in the entire country? How do we use those billions of dollars to invest in small businesses to create full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits, and simultaneously create MWBE opportunities so that women and minorities can get opportunities to participate in the contracting that this, the billions of dollars of contracting that the city does, but then also take those billions of dollars and let them be managed by African Americans, Latinos, and women, right? That's currently not happening and at the levels that it should be happening. And so that's the kind of leadership I want to provide and the kind of answers that I think I have for our community at this moment.
Yeah, you talk about MWBE, and I know I've talked to a lot of minority and women business and entrepreneurs. They talk about this all the time. That first of all, many times that utilization rate that should be there isn't always met, right?
Right.
That's on one side. But then on the other side, you have also those who say, listen, it's nice to have a utilization rate, but we want more than just the utilization rate. We want to just be utilized overall without the utilization rate. Talk to us about how we can see and how we can improve that, because I think that turns around business. That gets to the heart of the matter when you talk about local communities who really are the lifeblood of neighborhoods right now. So a lot of these small businesses fall right in that category.
Right. So even as a state senator, this has been an area that I've worked a great deal with, not just with the mayor, but also people on his staff like Greg Bishop, and now the new commissioner of small business services, Janelle Doris, who's a good friend. We need to continue to expand the amount of money that the city can contract out to women, minority business enterprises without a bid process. That would certainly help in a significant way. But the other thing, on the other hand, we also need to help some of these businesses on the outside. Right now, we need more access to capital. We need more access to the kind of technical assistance to help folks elevate. We need access to bonding, right? All of those things need to be provided, and we need to provide those supports for these businesses. And then at the same time, as we do contracting, we can't ask these small minority businesses to give loans to the city. What do I mean by that? You oftentimes are contracting on 90-day or 120-day terms and then paying people on 120 or 150-day terms. We can't continue to do that and have these lags of 30 to 60 days where people are not, getting paid, and thus having to come out of pocket and figure out how to close the gap. And so we really need to look for both more opportunities, but then also treat these businesses better in the context of our contracting processes. And certainly as city controller, these are things that I I can help with, and things that frankly my record and my experience demonstrates that I have a real commitment to.
What do we do about housing? I mean, you talk about the issue of how many times we talk about it, how many times are you bombarded with the fact of you have people say it's unaffordable to live in New York, and if you don't have big money, can't come through there.
Yeah, one of the problems that people are having, and this is again going back to the connection between the NYPD residency legislation. This was the issue the union had, right? It said that like New York is just unaffordable for police, and what we're seeing is that in communities like mine, you have transit workers married to nurses who can't find places to live, teachers married to social workers who can't find places to live, right? And so I'm proposing a workforce housing program that looks at city workers, looks at their AMI, and is geared towards creating programs that would allow these folks who go to work every day, who serve our city and serve our communities, find places to live in our city. And that's going to be, I think, a big part of alleviating the housing crunch.
Yeah, we got a little under 2 minutes left. I'm gonna give you the last word that you want to share with our viewers. Anything you want to share?
Yeah, a lot. I think there's a lot that needs to be done in this moment as we continue to battle COVID and the inequities that it has kind of revealed. And I've tried to again deal with that with things like a study that's happening with Blacks and Latinos and COVID on the utility moratorium. But this legislation that I have out there that I think shows the kind of leadership I want to provide in terms of, a council on equity to look at how we chart a course forward out of this pandemic, looking at how we serve small businesses, looking at how we create workforce housing, making sure that we address the issue of our young people. Not only should the city control's office invest in businesses, we should invest in our own communities, and particularly our young people who are 100% of our future. And again, doing things like universal after school is going to be a big step to making sure our young people are protected and to give them the guidance that they need to go forward, in this new COVID world that we're living in. And so I'm looking forward to collaborating with all of you the way I have collaborated over the last number of years to pass, the legislation I've been able to pass and provide the leadership that I've been able to provide both in Brooklyn, but also throughout the state of New York. And so, Daren, thank you very much, and the folks at BronxNet for this opportunity to talk with you, and looking forward to working with you all, as we try to rebuild our city.
Yeah, Senator Kevin Parker, certainly a pleasure to have you here on the show. And sorry it took so long, but we got you here, and we're glad to have you. And of course, we'll definitely bring you back. But thank you for sharing your information. And I'm sure we all have been enlightened a little bit more. Senator Kevin Parker, our guest here on Perspectives. Thanks, brother.
Thank you. The pleasure's all mine.
All righty. We want to tell you, thank you for watching us here on Perspectives. That about wraps it up for this edition. Now, listen, we never can tell you who to vote for, but we can tell you that when the time comes, it's important that you always exercise your right to vote. Also, during this time of COVID, yes, while the vaccination is going forward, let us not be lax. It is important we still maintain social distancing. We still do hand washing, and most of all, continue to wear the mask as vaccinations continue to come and make their way throughout New York. It is a problem, but the problem is getting better. As we look at the state of New York, 7 million people are actually residents of New York. To date, we know that 250,000 doses of vaccine comes in about every week. That problem means it's about 6 months before New York State would fully be vaccinated. But there's hope on the horizon. There's hope because, yes, the vaccine should be trickling in a lot more faster pace with the new presidential administration. So those of us that have COVID fatigue, well, let's just be tired just a little bit more. COVID isn't tired of us, and we've got to do the best job that we can to overcome that. That's your perspective. All right, we'll talk to you next week. Take care. God bless.